All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the NeuroFlex podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of photobiomodulation before. This is basically light therapy, where it involves red and near-infrared light energy that gets absorbed into the mitochondria in various tissues of the body, and including the brain, which is chock full of mitochondria. So at NeuroFlex, we use a photobiomodulation helmet specifically to stimulate the brain. This causes increased blood flow and oxygenation, decreased inflammatory cytokines, also increases neurogenesis and synaptogenesis, which is the growth of new brain cells and new connections amongst those cells. So if that's something that interests you, if you're in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, we do currently offer that as a mobile service. So go ahead and check us out at www.neuroflex.com, and you can learn more there. On to today's show, we have a very special guest, Nicholas Kadysh. Nicholas has spent the majority of his career helping companies navigate complex regulatory risk in healthcare. After a career in government at the federal and provincial levels, he has served as head of corporate affairs at JUUL Labs Canada, government affairs and public leader at GE Healthcare, and director of public affairs for Red Bull Canada. Nick is the founder of PharmAla Biotech, dedicated to the manufacture of MDMA and MDXX class molecules for pharmaceutical research. So Nick, super excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit. It sounds like you've had a really interesting career. Tell me about a little of your path and what's eventually led you here to the psychedelic industry.
So a lot of people are just like, what the hell are you doing here, man? And I could see how if you just look at me as like a lobbyist, I could see how people would sort of say that. But in point of fact, like my career has basically been on sort of like I've always worked for companies that are sort of on the edge of what is permissible by health regulators. So I worked in government a long time ago, like 1,000 years ago, and then I went to Red Bull, which is obviously food and beverage, but it's an energy drink, so it's fairly highly regulated for the food and beverage category. And that was like, if you remember 2013, like man, that was like as crazy as people got, was a little caffeine in a can. And then obviously, I worked in medical devices at GE, and then I did vaping at JUUL. And so like basically I've moved along with what society is sort of willing to accept. And obviously, the last domain left was, psychedelic drugs. Like, what else is there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So your company focuses mainly on MDMA and MDXX, right? So
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of people who are listeners of the show know a little about MDMA. I have not actually heard of MDXX before. Tell me a little about that molecule.
So MDXX it's not a molecule. It's basically the category of entheogens. Actually, I should say entactogens, not entheogens. Entactogens that are sort of direct analogs of MDMA. So it's the shorthand for the chemical class of molecules that are closest to MDMA. And in our conception, it has one big sort of defining characteristic, which is MDMA is the only drug that we really have that has this like very strong pro-social effect, and that's what we focus on. So we want to see molecules that have that strong pro-social effect. We think it's hugely important from a therapeutic perspective, and what we look for is actually molecules that actually improve on the safety profile of MDMA on top of the sort of pro-social effect.
Right. So yeah, what are some of the kind of side effects that MDMA has, and then what are some of the other molecules that have been kind of developed to maybe improve that safety profile?
So look, first I will say, before a whole bunch of people get angry at me, right? I think under the circumstances that MAPS has put together, so 3 MDMA assisted psychotherapy sessions over 3 months. I think MDMA is absolutely perfectly safe under those circumstances, right? But those are pretty limited circumstances. So me having a regulatory background, my team, like, our entire company, we're really focused on the regulatory side of this. We really believe that companies are only going to be successful in psychedelics if they understand sort of the perspective of FDA or Health Canada or UK Medicines Agency, whatever the regulator is in your country. If you don't understand how they sort of view you, then you're going to have a very hard time being successful, because drugs are rightfully, highly regulated. So putting aside the MAPS protocol, for instance, if you want to expand the use of MDMA to other treatment protocols, maybe have it taken more often, maybe have it taken by people who MAPS has basically excluded. As a for instance, MAPS has excluded anyone who has any cardiac or vascular issues in their sort of patient history. Well, I mean, to be frank, I think that kind of discounts anyone over the age of 65, right? I mean, I don't know a lot of 65-year-olds and up who have zero vascular and zero cardiac issues, right? So we wanted to focus on that. We wanted to focus on hyperthermia, which is like a known side effect of MDMA. But we can talk a little bit more about sort of what we're trying to achieve with our novel molecules as well.
What about neurotoxicity, which I know is a very debated topic in terms of MDMA and potentially related to dosage? But yeah, what's your take on that? And are there analogs that have less of a potential neurotoxic effect?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I'm also I'm also not 100% on neurotox. I think we view toxicology first in acute terms and then in chronic terms. So obviously, you want to make sure that you can treat people on the day that they're getting their treatment and do it properly without them having any sort of negative adverse events. I think that the neurotox is tied into the hyperthermia, to be honest with you. There's a great line that I will be very clear is not mine, because I hate unattributed quotes. But we do a lot of work with a brilliant researcher named William Fantagrossi at University of Arkansas, and his quote was, when we have effects in the brain that we like, and it involves sort of structural changes in the brain, we call that neuroplasticity, and it's great. And when we have those like exact same mechanisms, but we don't like their effects, we call that neurotoxicity or like axotomy, and we say it's bad. So I think it's two sides of the same coin. I think he's absolutely right, but we just have to be watchful for those negative effects, and if we're seeing them, then that's obviously a problem.
Got it. Now, what about in terms of, I know a lot of the research with MDMA, at least, MAPS is focused on PTSD treatment. What are some of the other focuses in the research currently with MDMA or MDXX related, analogs and some of their therapeutic potential?
Well, look, I think MDMA is really, really good at two things, right? It's really good at extinguishing conditioned fear response, and so that opens up the door to like all kinds of stuff. For instance, anxiety disorders, I consider those fear disorders. PTSD, of course, there's been a ton of work done. Phobias, I think MDMA is excellent for phobias. Maybe less so for like generalized anxiety disorder, because unless you know what the trigger is that's setting off that generalized anxiety disorder, I think you're going to have a hard time treating it. But the other thing that MDMA is very, very good at is generating this pro-social effect. It's like the only drug we have that generates a pro-social effect, and there's been brilliant research out of Johns Hopkins where one of the researchers there, who I apologize, I forget her name, but she actually dosed an octopus with MDMA, and it made the octopus more social. And like an octopus is about as far away from from an evolutionary perspective, it's like about as far away from a human being as you could possibly get, while still staying on planet Earth, right? So obviously, like MDMA taps into something that is like very primal in not just human sort of biology, but the biology of all animals on the planet, basically, I would think. We're really interested in social anxiety because it is the convergence of those two things. It's a convergence of sort of a fear disorder, but where that pro-social effect can be incredibly helpful. But listen, I'll also give a shout out to couples therapy. I think MDMA could be great for couples therapy, but that's not a disorder. It's not in the DSM, so you can't prescribe for it.
Right. Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, just in terms of like social anxiety, there was a study, I think, looking at like social anxiety in autistic adults, in terms of like MDMA treatment. But
it's Charles Grob and Alicia Danforth at UCLA. Yeah, great study. Very, very interesting work. We've spoken to Charles. I mean, he thinks that the results were very, very durable. So we're very, very interested in that kind of work.
Right. And I mean, expanding on that, I mean, I feel like it could just have such widespread applications. I mean, I don't know the specific statistics, but like, I mean, there's going to be so many people out there dealing with, some amount of social anxiety. And if this could be something that,
especially after we've all been locked in our houses for 2 years.
No kidding. I mean, this is, it's extremely so. I mean, people are so used to just isolating, and it's like, we try to come back out and socialize. It's like we haven't used that social muscle in so long. It's a good point.
Totally. Yep.
Do you see, like, because I know it's like, I mean, I guess, with like social anxiety disorder, diagnosed, is that something that we're going to see a lot more clinical trials come out, with MDMA?
I would hope so. Certainly, I'd love to see one of our analogs in clinical for that indication. I also, I mean, like the other interesting thing that you mentioned is that Charles Grubb, Alicia Danforth study focused on folks with ASD, with autism spectrum disorder. And one of the interesting things that we've discovered in our rodent models is, in point of fact, autistics react very, very differently to MDMA than neurotypical people. And I am certainly not qualified to say why or even to hypothesize why. All we know is there's clearly enough of a structural difference in sort of the autistic brain that they react differently to MDMA. So I'm hoping that some of the research that we do, that other people do, can sort of unlock some of the mysteries of autism and why these structural changes occur and how they occur. But also that we can help some folks. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, tell me about like some of the projects that you guys are involved in right now. It sounds like you guys are working with some different universities. Like, tell me about kind of the most intriguing things that you guys are working on.
Well, look, in August, I always give ourselves a shout out for this, but in August we became the first company other than MAPS to have produced clinical grade MDMA, GMP MDMA. So MAPS has a investigator sponsorship program where they will give you MDMA if you're a university professor with an idea that you want to experiment on, clinically, obviously. They will provide drug for investigator sponsored research, but they don't have enough for everybody. And so this is sort of part of why we founded the company. At a certain point, when we were doing our own clinical research planning, we started talking to a whole bunch of researchers, and everyone was like, man, like there's no MDMA. We want to do research. We'd love to do more research, but MAPS has limited supply and they can't provide it to everybody. And there's regulatory limitations to who they can give it to. And so I had an early conversation with Rick Doblin where I was like, hey man, I'm going to make some MDMA and provide it to clinical researchers. Is that cool? And to his credit, Rick, who's an amazing guy, obviously, was like, yeah, cool, do it. In the interest of science, the answer is yes. So in August, we made our first clinical batch, and yeah, we support universities all over the world. Before, in the preamble, we were talking, I mentioned University of California. We're supporting several universities in Australia, but also other companies, charities, and of course we're also really interested up here in Canada. We have this special access program, so we can treat patients. It's a difficult process and it's cumbersome and etc., but it's doable. So I'm really hoping that before the end of January, we do the first patient treatment through the special access program with MDMA in Canada.
And would that look similar to like the MAPS research where they're,
Totally.
two therapists, they're doing, therapy throughout the session?
Yeah, I made a promise to Rick that we would only give MDMA to therapists who are sort of, I mean, not just approved by Health Canada, but also who are trained in psychedelic psychotherapy. So I would assume that they're going to use the MAPS protocol. But yeah, for sure.
Got it. Now, what other applications are you aware of, like these different universities that you've been supplying MDMA to? Like, what other things are they researching? Uh,
Well, if I told you the protocols that our partners were going to research, they'd get pretty ticked off at me. So I
got
won't
it.
tell you that. I think. Look, I will say there's hugely exciting stuff happening right now in MDMA research. I think the increased availability of MDMA is actually a really important part of that, right? Like having clinical trial materials sort of easily accessible allows researchers to go off on like tangents and new directions and really frankly like do good science, which is the whole point of us getting into the sort of generic MDMA manufacturing business in the first place. And then for our own research, we have sort of three families of molecules that we've patented ourselves. And the first of these is the ALA family. That one we're taking to the Food and Drug Administration on the 30th of November, 2 weeks away. So we're going to have a pre-IND meeting, and we're basically going to ask them to allow us into clinical, allow us to start dosing human beings with it, and hopefully they say yes. We'll see what happens.
Very cool. Very cool. And so that's one that you expect that there's going to be a better safety profile compared to
Yeah,
MDMA.
definitely. Yeah, I think ALA has certainly on cardio talks. I'm very confident that we've nailed it on cardiotoxicology. Ultimately, all of our claims will get assessed by the agency, and they will decide whether our data is up to snuff or not. But that was our goal for sure: improve the cardiotoxicology, and then eliminate that hyperthermia effect. Because if you can eliminate that, then maybe you can start to look at like uses of MDMA with less monitoring. Um, like look, the way I see it in this industry, we are so focused on drug development that we've kind of forgotten that like that's just the first step. After you're done with drug development, you need to do market access and like worry about reimbursement from insurers. And somebody's got to pay for all these treatments and we have to train all these therapists. So, all of the sort of the news and everything else about psychedelics, this is just like the first half of the first inning, to use a baseball analogy, and we're sort of focused on sort of the second and third innings, which is the MAPS protocol is remarkable. It's obviously to my mind, there's no question that it is clinically highly effective in treating PTSD. Can we do anything to get the cost down? Right? Can we do anything to get this reimbursed by more insurers? And obviously, cost is a big part of that, right? So if we can improve the safety profile, it's not just regulators who will appreciate that, although I hope that they will. It's also sort of patients and the other actors in the healthcare system that could appreciate it, especially if we can prove MDMA's efficacy as a standalone without psychotherapy.
Right, right. There's actually a really interesting presentation that I saw at Wonderland, the psychedelic conference in Miami recently. I'm blanking on, it was a Johns Hopkins, I believe it was a Johns Hopkins researcher, Dr. Matthew Johnson. He was the one who gave a presentation. Yeah. I don't know if you saw, but just basically assessing, like, I think it was like self-reported, measures like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and seeing like people who weren't using it in conjunction with therapy, they weren't using like, medical grade stuff. There's just kind of like self-medicating with this stuff. They saw dramatic improvements. I mean, I think it was like 87% for depression, 90%, like very, very clinically significant improvements. So
yeah, and I mean, look, Matt is a brilliant researcher, and I know, like, I didn't see that particular presentation at Wonderland. I saw the recording afterwards, But he caveated this. Obviously, it's self-reported data, and we don't
Hmm.
through proof of anything, and blah blah blah. But just a leading indicator. But I think that is enough info that we should be testing this hypothesis, right? Like, let's. I'm not saying yes, it will be effective, or no, it won't be effective. What I am saying is we should find out. Well, let's do the research. Let's see what happens.
Right. Now, when you sort of look at the future of MDMA research and just the future of kind of psychedelic therapy in general, like what do you see taking place over the next like 5-10 years? Is this stuff going to be like the access way expanded, or is there still a long ways to go?
Look, there's a really long ways to go. Like I said earlier, I think we're just beginning this journey for psychedelic molecules, and because of the history here, there's going to be a lot of pushback. Frankly, this is also like so. So we've done a couple of things that we think can help sort of alleviate that pushback. We talked about the safety side of the molecule and improving that. The other thing is, I spoke at Wonderland, and one of my co-panelists basically said something to the effect of, and I don't want to misquote her, but she basically said, the counterculture was right, the hippies were right, everyone was wrong, and you need to just you need to accept that. To which I said, I don't agree. In addition to the counterculture, there's also the culture, and there's going to be a whole bunch of people, including like my immigrant parents, who will view this as like scary and dangerous and new. And I've been in several industries where we got ahead of ourselves, right? We tried to force the issue, and there was a pushback. That happened when I was at Red Bull. That happened with energy drinks in a way that I don't believe was fair. When I was at JUUL, that happened with vaping in a way that probably was fair, right? Not completely, because again, the pushback also like sort of goes overboard. But there's a very real world in which this happens in psychedelics, because lest we forget, like, it already happened once, right? Like, there's a reason that all these molecules were scheduled and criminalized. So I think it behooves us to be like careful and thoughtful and bring people along. So up here in Canada, we've started a trade association to do just that. We have 16 members. We meet with the government. We're a voice for sort of thoughtful, methodical decriminalization, regulation, medicalization of these molecules. And for any of my colleagues in the U.S. who are listening, start your own trade association. Make sure that you have a voice representing your industry, so that you can get ahead of this rather than fall behind.
Right. So are we going to see any, like we talk about, your past experience with Red Bull or JUUL, are we going to see these kind of like massive corporations, the JUUL per se of psychedelics or of MDMA? I mean, is that going to happen?
I think so. I think it's almost inevitable. I don't know that it's going to be like, right now, I don't know what the market leader is in vaping anymore. It's not JUUL anymore. Not really. Um, but I think most industries, once things shake out, and this is like long-term stuff. I'm talking about like let's say in 25 years, there's probably going to be three big companies, because there's always three big companies. You got your Coke, your Pepsi, and I don't know, Dr. Pepper. I don't know who number three is in the beverage industry. It might be Red Bull now. I don't know, but there's sort of there always ends up being three, and that's natural, man. That's human nature. We don't have the bandwidth to think about more than three of anything. In my opinion, that's just me.
I hear you. I hear you. I mean, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the cannabis industry, I feel like we're starting to see some like bigger names like pop up. I know it's still difficult when it's like you can't different state regulations, whatever, but it seems like the cannabis industry is definitely kind of like moving that way to some of the big
It'll shake
players.
out.
So yeah, so it
Yeah,
makes
it'll shake
sense.
out for sure. Yeah,
Right.
and like all this consolidation, it takes time, right? Like right now, look, there's a lot of great companies right now, but we're already kind of starting to see it in psychedelics, like this first wave of consolidation. Um, I don't want to spend the time like our time talking about capital markets because it's like the most boring part of this industry. But we've seen a couple of companies already run out of money and go out of business. We're going to see a couple of companies start merging to save themselves, right? Where there's sort of efficiencies, and you know, if I was approached by somebody who said, "Hey, let's merge," and we saw some really good synergies, I wouldn't say no out of hand. Like I'm not too proud to, band together and do good work together. So we'll see.
Awesome. Now, transitioning a little bit, I know you're the director of Psyched Wellness. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I wanted to hear kind of about kind of what that company is, and
yeah,
if you could talk a little about. I know I saw
sure.
that it's the first. You guys have an extract that's like the first legal Amanita muscara
Yeah,
extract that's
yeah,
available. So, would love to hear
yeah,
just some more about that.
yeah. So look, I'm a board director at Psyched. Big shout out to Jeff Stevens and the entire team there, David Chisel and Matt Singh, really good guys, doing something completely different than what I do at PharmAla. So they have a consumer product that is based on the Amanita muscaria mushroom. I was brought onto the board, number one as a corporate director, but also to help them with their regulatory strategy, and super proud of those guys. So they got their GRAS certification, which is in the U.S. It's for food. It's generally recognized as safe, and so they can now sell this Amanita extract legally. They're the first ones, I think, the only ones. And I know there's been some news about like some sort of Amanita sales going on illegally, which again, like, yeah, I'm sure you're getting tired of me talking about safety, but like, illegal sales, probably not great. There's lots of mushrooms that look like Amanita, but are not, you know? So yeah, those guys are doing great work. Big fan. You should have Jeff on the podcast. He'd be an interesting interview for you. He's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I will definitely reach out. Just in
Yeah,
terms
I'll
of
I'll connect you.
that would be great. That would be
Yeah,
great. So yeah, it's interesting to me because I honestly didn't know a ton about Amanita prior to the
yeah,
Wonderland conference, but saw that there were a couple booths distributing products, or
yeah.
maybe just one
No,
booth.
no comment on that one. There was definitely one booth that was selling some stuff, but it was so like there's a bunch of mushrooms in the Amanita family, some of which with the proper processing, again under GMP conditions, can yield a muscimol extract. And muscimol is a pretty well studied molecule that I think has great commercial uses, maybe even therapeutic uses, although those haven't been proven yet in clinical trial. So that's cool. Um, there's a bunch of other mushrooms in the Amanita family that are not super safe, and I would not recommend eating them in any form whatsoever. So yeah, I had I had a conversation with the Wonderland organizers saying, "Hey, are you sure that these people know what they're selling? Because I don't know." I came over and I said, like, do you have a C of A? Like, have you done any chemical testing? Like, guys, what are you selling? Just because it grows in the ground doesn't mean it's safe. There's a reason.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and when I did a quick Google search of Amanita, it's definitely not the most positive things that come up. A lot of side effects
No,
and kind of
yeah,
nasty stuff. So
yeah.
it's yeah. So
So along with the muscimol, which is sort of the active ingredient that you're looking for, there's ibotenic acid, which is not good. And then there's it's actually used as a lesioning agent in like neurological studies. So probably not
wow,
great. You probably don't want to consume too much of that. And then there's a couple of other molecules, muscarine and muscazole, all like not good. You don't want to consume these things. Um, Now you can convert the ibotenic acid into muscimol, and that's what Psych does, right? So like that's what they do in their extract. They convert all this ibotenic acid into muscimol. They limit the amount of other materials that are sort of coming out in the extract, and you get a pretty nice, clean muscimol extract that you can use for all kinds of stuff. Personally, I think it's great for sleep, but you not making any claims here. That's just my personal opinion.
Right, right. And it seems like in terms of the legality, it seems like there's certain countries that have made it illegal, but like the United States, it's completely legal. Is that correct?
Completely, yeah. Yeah, I think most countries it's completely legal. Like it's not like a drug of abuse. Like it's not something that people are like, oh man, can't wait to get that extra hit of amanita muscaria. No. So I don't think there's any serious concerns about it from regulators. Obviously, if there are, they'll let us know. The only places where it's like illegal is like I think Sweden, it's illegal, and Australia. I don't know why Australia, but I think in Sweden it was also like it's almost like a PSA, like don't eat this thing. You know, there's a real mushroom culture in Sweden. People go out and like actually forage for stuff. So
I also saw the Netherlands, which really surprised me. It's
weird,
like
man.
if
I don't know.
but I mean, it's like they criminalize like the actual like psilocybin mushrooms, right? But it's like truffles are legal, so it's like
Yeah,
some
exactly.
weird loopholes and stuff. But
Dutch drug law. Don't even get me started.
right, right.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, anything else before we wrap up today? Anything else? Any other projects or things that you think would be important for the listeners to know with this whole discussion?
Well, look, the only other thing I'll say is if you're working with a psychedelic company that does any work in Canada, please join PsyCan, Psychedelics Canada. PsyCan, PSYCAN.org is the website. Join PsyCan. We just had a meeting with the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. We're pushing forward on policy on a number of fronts, decriminalization, of course, but also better regulatory access for psychedelic companies. We represent the for-profit therapeutic side of the industry, and always looking for new members. Come join us and fight the good fight on the government relations front. And then stay tuned for more from PharmAla Biotech. We'll have our meeting with FDA on the 30th of November. We'll hopefully be in clinical trials by next year. Hopefully early next year. We'll see what the agency says. And if you're a researcher looking for MDMA, give us a call. If you got a license, we can sell it to you.
Awesome. Where can people find out more information about that?
pharmala.ca. We actually have a web form if you're a clinical researcher who wants to do research into MDMA, you can fill out the web form and we'll get back to you, usually within 12 hours. Just let us know how much you need, when you need it, all that stuff, and we'll send you our investigators brochure and all of our technical specifications, and you can do some research. That's what we're here for.
Very cool. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show today. For the listeners who enjoyed the show, you can listen to the audio episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or most other major audio streaming platforms. If you prefer to see the video episode, you can go over to YouTube, search in Neuroflex. That's NUROFLEX. That's the channel. You can see the full episodes on there. So, Nick, again, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Thanks for having me.